So please give it up for Eric V. Stacks.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, so I wanted to share a little bit of my life experience and some of the things that I have come to believe and think about as a result and a need to grapple with the fear that I was dealing with around this new discovery. I think a lot of us can relate to the idea of discovering Bitcoin and having that incredible aha moment and realizing that this thing is a potential threat to governments, regulators, and powers that be. And as a cannabis producer, I have spent many years of my life in a counterculture industry that has been illegal for a long, long time. And so first off, I guess I want to ask, who here has fear around government regulators coming down heavy-handed on Bitcoin? Yes, that's what I would have expected. Me too. And through logic and reason, and based upon the belief that I have that we live in a fundamentally quantum universe and reality, and I believe, like Nikola Tesla famously said, if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, you need to think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. And I believe in the law of attraction, and I believe that your vibratory state, your vibrational frequency is constantly being mirrored to you and the world around you. And living in a perpetual state of fear is, one, uncomfortable, but having adopted that belief set, I want to make sure I don't create a bunch of reason, perpetual cycle of fear-based beliefs that create a reality or an outcome that's what you don't want, what you're afraid of. And so I'm going to share a little bit about how the state of California came in to regulate an existing multi-billion-dollar industry, which doesn't seem to happen too often. Usually, as an industry develops, regulations also coincide. And so we have a similar dynamic with cannabis and the regulatory framework being implemented into this industry as we do with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is orders of magnitude more valuable as an industry and as a technology for our civilization. So I think there are some parallels there. And I'm going to share a little bit about that. So I'll start by sharing how I became a cannabis producer. When I was a young child, 5 years old, my parents divorced. The divorce, I would say, was fiat-induced due to the economic pressures that we're all experiencing as the currency is debased. Our cost of living and operating seems to be increasing at a faster rate than our ability to increase our revenue. And that divorce led to my mother being single and then remarrying a psychiatrist. That psychiatrist was a credible figure in our society and was indoctrinated, I would say, by the pharmaceutical industrial complex at large and believed that these petroleum-based pharmaceuticals were the solution to a lot of the ailments people were experiencing. And as a result of that marriage, my mother ended up getting into pharmaceutical use, and she took antidepressants for a long time, many years of her life. And there's a saying that I think a lot of us have heard, a patient cured is a customer lost. So she took SSRIs for 15 years. They didn't solve any of the underlying issues, and she ended up committing suicide when I was at the age of 20 years old. And to backtrack a little bit, my mother went back to school to become a professor of sociology. And so I was privy to a lot of philosophical-based conversations that were outside of the box, which really kind of helped prime me to develop a little bit of mistrust or the ability to question the system at large that we were living within. And additionally, the divorce, interestingly, resulted in my brother and myself having our own attorney and my father and my mother having their own attorneys, and court mediators were appointed. And at a very young age, I would go and sit with these court mediators, and they would tell us, hey, this is a safe place. You could explain to us whatever is happening in your life. We want to know, we're here to help you. And as soon as we would leave the court-appointed mediator's office, then I would get in the car with my mother, and my mother would say, so you told this individual what? Like, why do you believe that? And so immediately I developed an enormous level of mistrust for the system at large as being lied to as a young child, essentially. And so when I was 15 is when I first discovered cannabis and smoked cannabis and realized this isn't some devil lettuce that's gonna result in me ending up homeless on the streets. And so that series of events really helped to be a catalyst for developing mistrust for the system at large and drove me to be kind of, an individual that wanted to walk my own path in life. And so my mother passed away when I was 20 years old, which was definitely traumatizing. We all have different versions of trauma we've experienced in life. And at the age of 25 years old, I was invited to Northern California to trim cannabis on a cannabis farm. And I had felt that I had found my calling. And producing cannabis was very vindicating, or it felt like the ultimate fuck you to the pharmaceutical industry that at that time I blamed for the death of my mother and other family members and serious suffering that they had experienced as a result of taking these pharmaceuticals. So I moved from Southern California to Northern California in 2009 and started producing cannabis professionally at a commercial scale. And in 2015, the governor of the state of California at the time signed into effect a bill preemptively knowing that there was a very high probability that the people of the state of California were going to vote into effect a recreational adult use for cannabis. And so we had a transition where we were going to transition the industry in the state from medical use to recreational use. And the bill is called the Medical Marijuana Safety Regulations Act, which essentially put into effect the basic regulatory framework to bring all of these businesses into compliance, as they called it. And as a resident of Humboldt County, where most of the cannabis in the state was produced, Humboldt County was very proactive and got involved in building the regulatory framework out for the state of California, or in tandem with the state of California. And so in 2016, I felt like I was in the right place at the right time to scrap together every penny I possibly could to buy a property to become a licensed cannabis producer, which was my passion and my dream. And I achieved that dream. I closed escrow on a property and started going through the regulatory process to become a licensed cannabis producer. And so when I closed escrow at the beginning of 2017, I had the largest incentive I had ever had in my life to learn about the real estate boom-bust cycles, the Federal Reserve, our money system, and the economy at large. And in going down the economic rabbit hole, it led me to Bitcoin at the end of 2017, a month before I received my state license from the state of California. And that's an image of, or here we are, an image of the state license that I received at the beginning of 2018 for that very farm there, and that was my farm. And so this was a very triumphant, vindicating moment for me in my life, a month after I discovered Bitcoin. And during the process of cannabis becoming legal for recreational use, the profitability reduced significantly. As supply met demand and the supply increased relative to demand, the value of the product that I was producing plummeted significantly. So there I am on this property, which for me it was a dream come true, and in this short period of time I'm looking at the commodity that I produce lose value significantly. And I was very well primed as a commodity producer who was experiencing that downward price pressure on the product that I was producing to understand the significance of Bitcoin. If you have this monetary instrument that's truly scarce and is an engineered money, it has infinite demand, and that's a monumentally big deal. So this discovery of Bitcoin caused me to sell my property and pivot my life strategy and start doing farm consulting and management services. And so I will say we live, and this is thanks to Jeff Booth, in a deflationary world where as we become more efficient, we're producing more of everything that our civilization wants or needs. We are fundamentally pushing the price down on things. But that's an opposing force to the fiat monetary system where the monetary units are lent into existence as debt against assets. So what has to happen in order for the system to stay solvent is the nominal dollar-denominated value of the assets within the marketplace has to continue to go up. Otherwise, the system becomes insolvent and everything crashes. But that's fundamentally the opposite force of us pushing prices down as we become more efficient. And so for me, I had a very extreme version of the same problem a lot of us experience where our cost of living and or operating our lives is increasing at a faster rate than our ability to increase our revenue. And in my case, I was actually experiencing dollar-denominated wage deflation while I had dollar-denominated inflation in my cost of living and cost of goods. So you could say my P&L was taking a tremendous hit downwards. And the discovery of Bitcoin put me in a position where I was well primed to understand the magnitude. I started to save all my money in Bitcoin, make that my treasury reserve asset or the prominent asset on my balance sheet. Over time, I started to see and realize that the appreciation on my balance sheet was so great, it was offsetting my loss of income. And I think we all have a similar version of that. If you make, for example, $30 an hour and you get a 10% raise on average over many years, but your cost of living is going up by 15% a year on average, you're actually taking a 5% haircut. So I guess part of what I want to say is that I have experienced such tremendous price upward appreciation on my balance sheet that it's hedged me very successfully against the wage deflation that I've experienced. And another interesting thing that happened during the process of going from medical cannabis to recreational cannabis is the regulators within the state came out with their regulatory framework, which was quite heavy-handed. They wanted high fees. They had a lot of expectations and requirements for the industry at large. And a good example was in Humboldt County, there was 12,000 farms in Humboldt County that were visible via satellite. You can see these farms on Google Maps. And they put into effect a deadline for registration of these farms. You had to come into compliance. You had to register your farm so that then you could get permitted by the county and licensed by the state. And when the original deadline hit, out of 12,000 farms, 123 people registered their properties. And the regulatory model that was offered to the industry was a carrot and a stick kind of model. And instead of the regulators sending enforcement around to go and shut these farms down that you can drive up to, that anybody on their iPhone right now can go and pull up and see these greenhouses. This is a Google image from Google Maps. Instead of shutting the farms down, they extended the deadline. They dropped a bunch of the regulatory impedance. They made it much more attractive for the industry to get involved in this licensing process because the governments need the revenue from the taxation. They need the licensing fees. And so there I am a couple of years after this kind of pivotal experience in my life, kind of grappling with the fear that I had around what could the governments and the world leaders do as a result of Bitcoin, and needing to find a logical, reasonable way to shed the fear that I was experiencing because I have the fundamental belief that the universe is vibrationally based and it's quantum, and I don't want to attract things because I'm in a position of perpetual fear. So I started to think about what are good ways to come up with, an understanding that allows me to liberate myself from my fear. And so this is one of the things that came to mind. Now, when I think about the cannabis industry and the leverage that they had compared to the Bitcoin industry, it's incredible. It's orders of magnitude easier to insulate yourself from any sort of governmental overreach. As an example, I have a friend that was buying weed on the Silk Road with his Bitcoin. He's buying KYC Bitcoin. He's sending his Bitcoin into a wallet of his. It's on a hard drive. He moves from one apartment to another apartment. He looks at the hard drive and thinks to himself, I have $300 worth of Bitcoin. It was like 2 coins at the time. Throws the fucking thing away. He just throws it away and moves forward, thinking to himself, it's more expensive to recover the data on this hard drive. And so how could you even prove that he still has access to his keys? You can't. You could never prove that he still has access to his keys. And so if you have Bitcoin in self-custody, you can insulate yourself very heavily or effectively from somebody taking your Bitcoin, where a cannabis farmer running their cannabis business can't hide their cannabis farm. So, and as far as individuals within the Bitcoin industry, they're developing technology to allow us to move economic energy around very efficiently. Another element that comes up when I think about all of this is weed is just a plant that I think should be available for people who want to use it. They should be able to use it. And it's an industry where there's economic activity, so it's an opportunity for governments to tax that business. But Bitcoin is a solution for governments. Governments that are responsible for the monetary policy that results in the debasement of the currency are also increasing their cost of operating at a faster rate on average than they can bring in more revenue. And it's this back and forth game of debasement and taxation, debasement or taxation. If you debase too fast, the people go crazy. If you tax too much, the people go crazy. So Bitcoin is a solution for governments, not a threat. And at times I get a little bit concerned that the individuals who make up the governments don't see this, but it's also the self-serving economic incentive involved in putting this apex asset on your balance sheet or saving in Bitcoin. That is that Trojan horse of freedom. It's a freedom virus. It's sucking people in because of the number go up technology in a world where people's cost of living is increasing at a faster rate than their ability to increase their wages on average. So I would say the conclusion that I want to just share is keep stacking and stay positive and take self-custody when you can. I also think there's another thing that I want to shed light on. We all can agree that we want the whole world to come in and adopt Bitcoin. But there is a dynamic that I see taking place where as that's starting to happen, people are scared. BlackRock's involved. Oh no, BlackRock's buying coins. That's what you want. And there is a place for the ETF, as controversial as that sounds. Like if my 90-year-old grandmother starts buying Bitcoin, I would suggest that she buys the ETF so she doesn't lose her private keys and donate her Bitcoin to the network. So as more of the governments and nation states and small businesses, large businesses, corporations start coming into Bitcoin, I would say that that's what we want, and I would look at the situation through the lens of, is there anything truly to be scared of in this? Because this is, as far as I can tell, not a threat, it's a solution. And so I guess I would say that is essentially the whole message that I wanted to share with everybody today. This isn't a threat, this is a solution, and I think we have all the reason in the world to be optimistic and positive and progressively let go of our fear. Yeah, and also I'm very grateful to be a part of it and grateful for Bitcoin. As far as I can tell and believe, this is the greatest discovery in all of human history. So thank you, everybody, for being a part of it. Yeah.